Welcome to Digging in the Dirt. My name is Paul Marchbanks, and I'd like to prime you to watch a weirdly mesmerizing film involving time travel that captured the public's imagination back in 1995. Terry Gilliam's 12 Monkeys. Audiences learned very early to expect the ludicrous whenever a Terry Gilliam feature arrived in theaters. The silly and occasionally sophisticated absurdity of Monty Python's sketch comedy show in the early 70s translated quite well into fan-favorite films like The Holy Grail, and continued to shape the tenor of many of Gilliam's solo endeavors. Time Bandits and The Adventures of Baron Munchausen, both of which Gilliam directed and helped write, take audiences on similarly wild adventures that provide 2 parts social commentary and 10 parts rollicking fun. In the mid-80s, Gilliam started creating another type of story that veers more often into serious terrain, a dystopic strain of narrative that offers up Gilliam's characteristically bizarre visuals and impossible situations. In 1985, the futuristic film Brazil eviscerated those preposterously inefficient governmental bureaucracies whose flagrant ineptitude too often serves as a cover for nefarious agendas and targeted injustice. 10 years later, Gilliam followed up with 12 Monkeys, and nearly 2 decades after that, envisioned in the Zero Theorem the relational stagnation he believed would inevitably accompany a wired world in which technology promised personal significance it could not deliver. Despite their very different subjects, Gilliam's dystopic fare and the amusing films made with Monty Python are surprisingly similar in their ideological preoccupations. At the heart of all these films is the question posed by Pilate to Jesus 2,000 years ago. What is truth? In the Gospel of John, the governor of Judea utters these words right after Jesus declares, quote, "The reason I was born and came into the world is to testify to the truth. Everyone on the side of truth listens to me." Much depends, of course, on the tone with which one reads Pilate's words, on the way we stage this dramatic moment in our imagination. Pilate turns from this exchange to tell the crowd waiting outside, who have angrily demanded Jesus' death, "I find no basis for a charge against him." Pilate is obviously not convinced that Jesus deserves crucifixion, and might be moved by Jesus' words to contemplate the very nature of truth. If we're cynically inclined, however, we can choose to read Pilate's words, "What is truth?" as less an earnest question and more a sarcastic rebuttal of the very concept. This latter take anticipates Terry Gilliam's customary parodic posture towards those who would ask related questions about true knowledge, true love, and true purpose, a skeptical inheritance from his Monty Python days that he is slow to abandon. Let's rewind to the mid-70s for a moment. In Monty Python and the Holy Grail, the comedy troupe mocks the Knights of the Round Table in their quest to find the cup that Jesus presumably used during the Passover meal preceding his death. In Monty Python's take on the medieval legend, King Arthur proves hilariously inept, Galahad's chastity is tested by 8 wanton teenagers in the castle Anthrax, and Lancelot bloodily breaks up a wedding party in efforts to save a desperate damsel from an arranged marriage, only to discover that she is a he. The film's surprisingly meta ending, which abruptly ends the knights' joint quest, suggests that the search for significance is a fantasy and doomed to failure. Monty Python's Life of Brian, which appeared 4 years later, also ridicules earnest conviction, this time poking fun at the life of Jesus by setting up a parodic parallel who goes by the name Brian, Brian, born the same night as Christ and initially mistaken for the Messiah by the three wise men from the east, years later tries to dissuade a crowd determined to treat him as a prophet with, "You don't need to follow me. You don't need to follow anyone. You need to think for yourselves. You're all individuals. You're different. You've all got to work it out for yourselves." The rapt crowd hangs on his every word, echoing each phrase as he utters it, but failing to take to heart his, and I think Monty Python's suggestion that human diversity demands a plurality of separate truths as innumerable as the humans who inhabit the planet. The closest Monty Python comes to proposing their own truth arrives in the closing song sung by a host of innocents selected by Roman centurions for the latest crucifixion. Quote, "Always look on the bright side of life, for life is quite absurd, and death's the final word. You must always face the curtain with a bow. Forget about your sin, give the audience a grin. Enjoy it. It's your last chance anyhow." Their next film, The Meaning of Life, closes with a slightly more prescriptive admonition about trying to, quote, "live together in peace and harmony with people of all creeds and nations." When you think about it for half a second, this nice platitude is impossible to realize if we don't share at least a few common assumptions. When we reject the very idea of a moral framework underpinning reality, and everyone instead attempts to work it out for yourselves, chaos and violence are much more likely than peace and harmony. If we return, however, to Gilliam's dystopic trilogy, we discover the farcical increasingly complemented by weighty reflections about the nature of morality. The film Brazil deals in epic exaggerations that skewer and fry up a shallow materialism for the hungry critic of bureaucracy, nepotism, plastic surgery, and that brand of government overreach that perpetrates unwarranted violence. Romance actually provides a meaningful, if short-lived, alternative to the never-ending grasp for greater influence and new toys, as does the ill-fated effort to obtain justice and freedom for the marginalized. The bleak ending may recall that of the novel 1984, which was set a year before Brazil comes out, but at least the hero of Brazil reaches his goal inside his head, an intangible freedom withheld from George Orwell's Winston. The protagonist of The Zero Theorem also discovers a happy ending within his imagination, the only place Gilliam seems to think happiness can ever be found. Like Vladimir and Estragon, who in Samuel Beckett's play Waiting for Godot wait for someone who never shows up, Gilliam's computer programmer Cohen Leth works from home for years in eager anticipation of a phone call that never comes. A call he believes will replace his emptiness with meaning and direction. Cohen's meager, wired life, attenuated by lack of exercise, unremitting screen time, and very little social interaction, seems rather unlivable. Besides the two individuals paid to keep him company for a limited time, one of whom offers him a love he inexplicably rejects, his only interactions are with an endless series of AI salespeople who address him by name both in his home and from the public buildings he passes on those rare occasions that he manages to step outside. Ultimately, the dramatic destiny he has long awaited arrives when, through a confluence of ludicrous events, his consciousness enters a virtual world he appears to control. Reality is now whatever he makes it. 12 Monkeys, the central film in this dystopic trio, thrusts the audience into the point of view of a character striving to make sense of two topsy-turvy worlds, both the one he inhabits in a future era populated by subterranean survivors of a global plague, and that strangely civilized period decades past, which he visits via time machine. We not only walk alongside James Cole in his efforts to save humanity, but ask, with him, whether we can trust what we see and hear within the film. Unlike Robert Zemeckis' Back to the Future, which makes quite clear what Marty McFly can and cannot do, what he sees and what he hears, 12 Monkeys prompts us to question just about everything on screen. The screenplay by Janet and David Peoples, which Terry Gilliam turned into a box office success that made back nearly 6 times its production costs, is admittedly more legible, easier to decipher than the photo novel La Jetée, released in 1962, which inspired 12 Monkeys. But even so, Terry Gilliam's film does require the same close attention of, say, a Christopher Nolan sci-fi film. 12 Monkeys forces us to question that simple binary separating sanity from madness that has made it so very easy for hundreds of years now to sequester and medicate anyone whose ideas do not conform to majority opinion. The question, what is truth, takes on a new urgency when you're not sure you can trust your own senses, memories, or conclusions. As Emily Dickinson once observed in one of her poems, quote, "Much madness is divinest sense to a discerning eye. Much sense, the starkest madness. 'Tis the majority in this as all prevail. Assent, and you're sane. Demur, you're straightway dangerous and handled with a chain." Brad Pitt's character Jeffrey Goins, introduced in a mental hospital with a notably askew eyeball that telegraphs his odd point of view and apparent insanity, utters words eerily similar to Dickinson's. "There's no right. There's no wrong. There's only popular opinion." His observation, applied to the concept of germs introduced by scientist Ignaz Semmelweis in the 19th century, anticipates Brad Pitt's similar questioning of cultural norms when playing the role of Tyler Durden in Fight Club 4 years later. Both characters want something more vital and dynamic than the deadening expectation of the latest, hottest products fed them by middle-class consumerism. "Crazy is majority rules," observes Jeffrey. "The public at large determines normal and abnormal, whom to sequester in mental hospitals and who to put back on the streets. Their decision is based in part on whether someone buys into the prevailing system or not. We don't like dealing on a daily basis with those whose alterity, apparent in their atypical behavior and ideas, threatens to upend that status quo which arguably keeps us just as pacified as one of Jeffrey's fellow inmates under heavy sedation." Dr. Catherine Rayleigh, a psychiatrist who encounters Jeffrey during his jaunts to the past, begins the film with a confident assurance that she can separate delusion from reality, as well as right from wrong. Her interactions with Jeffrey challenge this certainty, leading her to questions as profound as Jeffrey's. In One Moment of Doubt, she notes that psychiatry is the latest religion, one she's no longer sure she can trust. What do you think? Does the film leave us without any resolutions, or does it surprise us with answers? Does 12 Monkeys offer any concrete conclusions about the things that Monty Python customarily makes fun of, including romance, morality, and destiny? How does it compare to other dystopic tales and films you've run across? Does it provide a more meaningful glimpse of hope? Of truth?